Throughout the nation, there is a growing interest in cover cropping. Crop producers are reaping the growing benefits cover crops have to offer.
We're seeing a substantial increase of cover cropping across the United States on farm fields everywhere. Primarily, farmers are interested in building the health of their soil. And one of the ways to do that is to grow a cover crop. From increasing nutrients to cycling nutrients to improving the overall tilth of the soil and adding other values such as feed and seed when it's appropriate for a farm.
The cover crops are very important to our farmers out there nowadays. That allows us to capture those nutrients in that soil profile that we may not be able to capture. So if carbon and nitrogen are 2 feet down in the soil, those roots of those cover crops can go retrieve those nutrients, bring them back to the soil surface to be used on a later crop.
One of the goals of growing cover crops is to increase the amount of residue on the surface of the soil, especially when there's no other crop being grown. During this period, those soils are very prone to erosion, degradation, runoff of nutrients, and runoff of water. And so a cover crop actually acts as a protectant to the soil during the time when crops aren't being grown. So it's really an essential piece to improving environmental quality on farms.
In some areas, the short growing season limits the potential of establishing cover crops following full season crops, like corn.
It's really difficult to get cover crops established at the end of a growing season when you don't have much of a growing season. The goal is to get an effective cover crop, one that is growing, has lots of biomass, lots of root system, so that can provide the benefits that the farmers need. And in order to get those cover crops established, seeding the cover crop into the actual crop is a viable option. Interseeding cover crops allows us to actually get the cover crop seeded prior to harvesting the cash crop. That's really important because in a short growing season, we're harvesting so late in the season that oftentimes there's not enough time to properly establish a cover crop once the cash crop is harvested. So interseeding gives us the ability to get the cover crops on the ground, growing and effective before the crop actually is removed.
Today, American Farmer is on location with Interseeder Technologies to learn more about the latest in cover cropping tactics.
About 8 years ago, several of us were involved in a research project here at the university where we were studying the removal of corn stover and the effect that that had on the soil. So if we removed that corn stover for ethanol purposes, what would that do to the soil? And some of the treatments involved in that study was a cover crop. One of the challenges we have with the cover crop and planting it after grain corn is removed is we don't have enough growing season for the rest of the year. So we're planting a cover crop in knee-high corn, and the idea is to get that started, that it can just survive in that low light, low moisture environment while that corn's growing in July and August. And then in September, when the corn starts dying down, it'll allow the fall rains to get into that cover crop and it can start growing in September, October, and November when we traditionally harvest our corn. So in 2011, Penn State patented this technology, and in 2013, Interseeder Technology was formed. Interseeder Technologies is really a science-based company. We've done research on the Interseeder at many different universities throughout the United States, and the makeup of the founders of the company are also all farmers or ag researchers.
The Interseeder is a high clearance no-till grain drill where it's actually set up to plant a cover crop between the rows of corn or soybeans or other row crops. It can be converted to a grain drill by the addition of extra row units added back into the piece of equipment. We actually achieve very good seed to soil contact of the cover crop seed by drilling them directly into the soil. A lot of other methods rely on a broadcast application on the soil surface. What makes this sort of an improved version of that is we are achieving great seed to soil contact by drilling them directly into the soil.
Our competition out there is using an airplane or a highboy seeder that just drops the seed when the leaves start falling in the corn, and it doesn't allow the soil to seed contact that the Interseeder allows us to have. So we feel that the Interseeder, we've had about an 85% success rate of getting that cover crop established. We're using an airplane and some highboys, you're really around 35 to 50%, and it's very weather dependent.
Additionally, interseeding can be successfully implemented with much lower seeding rates than aerial applications of cover crop seeds.
We're interested in the Interseeder to get more consistency out of our results. When we were aerial seeding, we'd have good take with the seed, and sometimes we had poor take with the seed, depending on when the rainfall came after we aerial seeded it. With this piece of equipment, we get better seed to soil contact, so we can consistently get a stand, and that's what we're after, is we want our ground covered. We don't want the ground getting any light actually hitting it. We want the plants to intercept the light. And to do that, you gotta have good stands. So we were searching for something like this for a few years.
It is important to know that interseeding can be done successfully without decreasing corn yield.
I guess the best definition for healthy soil to me is when you can raise more with less inputs. That's your true determining factor. When you start raising more than you fertilize for, I think there's a strong correlation to where your soil health is actually good and bad. The machine itself has been a great experience. There's some learning curves that we're going to have to deal with in our part of the world about when to apply and when to interseed for the stage of the crop we're looking for. But the seed to soil contact was great this year. We had extremely good stands. We only did 7 different species in the interseeder, but I think the interseeder itself is capable of planting 15, 20 species at a time. It's a foam-based plate system, and it delivers any type of seed, any size of seed, very precise. We think the biggest advantage that we've seen so far is the infiltration. We're also adding roots that would otherwise not be growing that time of year. For instance, this crop behind us, we have ryegrass that's still green like it would be June or July. It is now November 3rd or 4th, and we typically do not have anything that still has a living white root. And we have that with this. It's a great feeling to see something living in the soil.
The interseeder, to be very functional for the end user or the farmer, has the ability to also apply herbicide and a fertilizer. Fertilizer is applied 4 inches off the corn row. The idea there is that we're close enough to the corn that the corn can utilize the nitrogen. We really don't want the cover crop to utilize the nitrogen. It's also far enough away from the cover crop seed that we don't burn the cover crop seed. So there's a sweet spot there that we're able to direct the nitrogen application, that it aids the corn and doesn't impede the cover crop. Herbicide is actually applied through a set of drop nozzles that takes the herbicide down below the corn canopy. And the reason for that is when we're doing a broadcast application of the herbicide, we really want it on the target species, the weeds that's under the corn. We really don't want to apply it all over the corn itself, so we drop it through a set of nozzles that puts it right onto the weed species we're trying to kill, and it works very effectively.
In addition, its ability to facilitate no-till relay planting makes it possible for farmers to develop a soil cover year-round. In doing so, the interseeder has generated interest in conservation organizations as a tool to build soil health and reduce runoff and erosion by expanding cover crops.
The interseeder really allows the producer to generate a cover crop more efficiently and quickly because it opens that window up a little more. Now you have time in June and July to put in a cover crop while you still have corn on the ground, and you're not creating a lot of work for yourself on the back end after the corn's been harvested. It's generated interest in 3 different ways, really. The first one being the erosion control aspect of it, and the fact that we can now get a cover crop in the ground quicker and easier and more efficiently. Another way that it has really generated interest is the fact that we now have an extra crop in there taking excess nutrients out of the ground. So with constant manure application, we can now remove that nitrogen and phosphorus a little better. The third way is the fact that now we can get out there and do outreach, and we can educate the public and the producers out there and allow them to try out this new product without having to spend a lot of money on the product themselves.
There's a huge value in cover crops. Not only are we reducing erosion, which is very critical to the area, we're also fixing nitrogen, fixing nutrients. We're suppressing weeds with our cover crops if we can get them in early enough. There's a lot of seed options available to the growers these days, not only the grasses, annual grasses, perennial grasses, clovers, and also radishes. There's summer annuals available. All depends on the situation that you're looking for and the benefit of what you're looking for at the end, whether it's nitrogen fixation, grazing, or a hay crop.
The customers that are using the technology are predominantly corn or soybean producers. Many of those are faced with trying to get a cover crop seed planted after grain production. This gives them the opportunity to plant that cover crop earlier in the year. We found other markets in raised vegetable production as well as cotton. And then another sort of unique location that we're working with is where water quality is an issue. So there's some conservation districts, both in the Chesapeake Bay, and then as we move out into Wisconsin, we have a group in the Fox River Basin that's close to Green Bay. They're really trying to retain farm nutrients on the farm and not let them leach off into the groundwater or to the streams, and we're finding a lot of interest from those folks as well.
This Interseeder is going to help soil health more because we're going to get a more diverse root system into our soils. Right now, these guys planting corn after corn or corn and beans and not getting wheat into the rotation are really struggling getting good aggregate stability. When you have a cereal grass, any type of cereal grain in your system, you can have a fibrous root system, and that fibrous root system accumulates soil aggregates, and that helps infiltration. So when we're getting rid of that crop in our sequence, we've got to find a way to get something of that root structure into our soils, and this can help.
The American farmer really wants to be a good steward to our land. We feel that the Interseeder is a tool that they can use that will allow them to save the water that's on their farm and keep the soil there. And if they can keep the water and soil there, the nutrients stay on the farm. And if the nutrients can stay on the farm, that makes both environmental and economic sense for the farmer.